Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic Wednesday show. We've got a fantastic guest, and I've got my great co-host, Kim, as well. And it's episode 269. We're into February, folks. Where's the year going? I don't know. But I'm going to let my guest introduce himself first. Jeff Cobb. Would you like to just give a quick outline of what you're about, Jeff? And that would be great.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan and Kim. And I'm Jeff Cobb, and I've been working in the market for adult lifelong learning, continuing education, professional development for more than 2 decades at this point. And so I've seen a huge amount change in that time period. And particularly in recent years, I feel like there's just been a real learning revolution. And I've written a book by that name, and I think it's opened up a huge number of opportunities for organizations that serve that market, but even more so recently, we're seeing just the tremendous growth of entrepreneurial activity in the market. So solo edupreneurs, small businesses that are jumping in using a variety of different platforms to deliver learning, to reach their audiences, and really to add a whole new element to this market that I've been serving for so long. So I'm all about that market and the people who serve it, basically.
Oh, that's great. And Kim, would you quickly like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Along with being the co-host of this great show, I am Kim Shivler. I'm a communication strategist and instructional design consultant, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm the founder of WP-Tonic. We're a WordPress maintenance support service and company with a speciality on learning management systems and membership sites using WordPress. And before we go into the interview, I just want to quickly mention our sponsor of this episode, and that's Kinsta Hosting. WP-Tonic uses Kinsta to host our own site. It's a fantastic hosting company. It only hosts WordPress. And if you go to the WP-Tonic to see the full show notes and the full interview with Jeb, there will be links to Kinsta, and they are affiliate links, and you would be helping the show if you decide to utilize their services, either yourself or for your clients. But like I say, they're a great hosting company. We host the WP-Tonic site with them, and they've just been fantastic. So let's go straight into the interview with Jeff. So I've watched a few of your interviews, Jeff, and to say that you're the right man at the right time would be an understatement. It just seems to be an explosion in online courses and training. And I was thinking what my first question would be with you. So obviously, like web design was a new methodology of communication, but it got a lot of its origins from the past, from print. It's kind of language from print and from poster design in some ways. So I think online education gets some of its vocabulary and framework from the past, but it's also a very new methodology, isn't it? Would you agree with that? And secondly, how do you see it kind of breaking away from its past, in a way, from what happened in the past, to become a new way of education?
Yeah, great question. I think you're absolutely right that that online is definitely borrowing a lot from the past. And the funny thing that's happening at the same time is a lot of the past approaches to education are coming under fire, getting a lot of criticism. So, the first move that you'll see most people make, whether they're organizations, entrepreneurs, whatever, when they jump into online learning is often going to be to do a webinar or a series of webinars, and they may use them for marketing, and they may try to sell them, whatever the case might be. But they're going to go online with this tool that'll allow them to present PowerPoint to the world, which of course has been happening in lectures for decades and decades. And before that, it was a chalkboard. But it's basically somebody standing there talking at you, putting something up on a board, and hoping you're going to learn something in the process. And to be honest, that's always been flawed in the classroom. I mean, there's a place for it. It does serve its purpose at times, but to totally depend on that is a horrible way to go about educating people or helping people learn. Unfortunately, that tends to get transferred into the online world. So you have these PowerPoint presentations. Sometimes you get some video thrown in with an expert, talking at you, and very little real learning going on. And, so that's happened. And then also as people have moved into self-paced courses, it's really just been taking that and making it self-paced. So you still got the lecturer delivering at you, through some sort of video and that sort of thing. So, fortunately, that's changing some in the actual classroom. Educational institutions, other types of training providers are catching on to the fact that you really need to facilitate learning. You need to help people engage with it, help them find their own motivation, connect with it, use good learning practices. The science has just improved tremendously, over the course of the last decade. We just know so much more about how people learn. And so, to go to how that's now impacting online learning, we're seeing learners take control, because learners can go out and, the catalog now for online courses really is Google. And it's no longer courses. People are searching and they may get a course, they may get a brief video, they may get a document. They're going to put together what they need to learn. And I think the edupreneurs and the traditional organizations that get that are starting to reshape their learning and realize the possibilities that the web is offering. And so they're figuring out, how can we curate that? How can we help that process? And then, how can we help that interaction and engagement? And I won't go too deeply into it right now, but for example, right now we're running an online conference and we are doing some of the traditional, delivery of expert content, but we've got a community going with it. We've extended it over a few weeks so that people are able to interact, ask questions, engage with each other. We're providing some prompts along the way. It's just some things to help them find the learning that they actually need and be able to bring it back and connect with others. And that's really hard to do in a traditional education setting. You can go off to college for 4 years and maybe have that, but your average adult is in no position to do that. But the web and online make that possible if you actually start to leverage those tools that we've been given. And we're starting to see more and more of that.
Oh, thanks for that. Before I bring Kim in with her questions, do we actually have any idea how people do learn things?
Oh, all sorts of ideas. I mean, it depends what perspective you're coming from. But, as far as what it actually takes for people to be able to learn things, we know, for example, that I taught Russian many, many years ago, and there was a Russian saying, "Повторение мать учения," which is repetition is the mother of learning. And unfortunately, we've done repetition very badly in the past because it's just been rote repetition and memorization. But repetition is important. And we're finding, for example, that when people can space learning out over time and practice things repeatedly over time, and practice is a key word there, not just read them again and again, but actually apply them in their situation. That's one of the key areas, to take learning and do what's called elaboration and connect it back to what you already know. Just scraping the tip of the iceberg there. There's just really good science on how people learn now, and it translates well into what should we be doing as people who are educators or facilitating learning with the experiences that we're putting together.
That's great. Kim, have you got any questions? You're muted, Kim.
I know I'm muted. I had to unmute. Oh, I have questions. This is my wheelhouse too.
So yeah, we're right in your
yeah. Well, I like always want to move Jonathan out of the way and just geek out with the other educators for hours. Here's one of the things you were mentioning was the bad practice of just taking that PowerPoint delivery and moving it online. Part of that I always have felt wasn't just that it was an old education practice. In a lot of ways, it was the corporate education practice by people who had no concept of the science of learning.
Right.
And then it got transferred in to online because for one, I think the first people who grasped online learning once the internet was popular were the internet marketers.
Very true. Very true.
Who are you seeing now? Because I've been getting excited about some things I'm seeing. Who are you seeing now that's really coming to the forefront and bringing in some of these better practices for, hey guys, we really need to make this truly educationally sound, because we've fortunately now gotten to the point where it's so crowded out there that some of the cruddier stuff's going to fall to the wayside.
Mm.
Who should we be looking to really to help us pull us up on that?
Yeah. I would say, the best of the internet marketers, you reference them, and I followed them for quite a while now, because I realized back when I was writing my book, I was focusing mostly on sort of traditional continuing education, professional development organizations. And I started noticing, all these marketers, like Brian Clark at Copyblogger, he had this whole thing called Teaching Sales. And it was all about how impactful teaching can be as a sales tool. And they got heavily into doing online courses and online communities as a result of that. And they do it quite well. I mean, they have people there who do understand learning now and are trying to make it into a meaningful learning experience. So you see that type of thing going on out there with the best of the internet marketers, the people who recognize that this isn't a one-shot deal, that you want to attract these people in and build a relationship with them and be a learning resource for them over time. And I think if there's one key trend in adult learning in particular right now, it's moving beyond transactions and into relationships, so that you become that go-to resource for learning. And learning takes time, so you want to recognize that as part of what you're doing. So certainly some of those types of companies, again, Copyblogger does it. Ryan Dice, who's internet marketer par excellence, he does quite a bit of it. He's a little more lecture heavy than some of the others, but he still has very compelling content that he offers. And then, we've had this conference going on that I mentioned, the online conference. So we've had, quite a few examples come in. These are going to be more in kind of the organizational, the trade and professional association type world, but just the types of things that people are doing. Microlearning has become a big buzzword these days, which means very short chunks of learning. People usually associate it with video. It doesn't necessarily have to be video, but it's usually things that people can, do in 5 or 10 minutes, basically. And then maybe move on to another thing to do in 5 or 10 minutes, and get those short bites of learning that align with their need, align with their attention span, give them the ability to repeat, give the ability to prepare themselves for a longer learning experience or to reinforce a longer learning experience. So we're seeing organizations do that. The Ohio Society of CPAs, for example, is doing that. They're actually CPE, where you have to earn credit for learning. That's a big thing in the accounting profession. And you traditionally have to go to these day-long seminars and earn your hours and hours of CPE. They've got it down to where their state board is allowing them to offer 10-minute CPE. So you can get a 10-minute credit for CPE and accumulate those up to an hour. So pretty interesting approach there. We had another organization, this fellow Mark Nillis from a group called Humentum present, and they're using a tool called Booster Learn. And that's a specific technology, but the technique they're using is boosting learning, basically. So it's an email program where following an event, they send out a sequence of questions over about 8 weeks or so to give just some brief, recall type assessments for people to help them make sure that they're recalling what they learned at the event, and also giving them some things that they can apply in the setting. And anybody could do that. They're an organization that happens to be doing that, but your average entrepreneur could do that sort of thing. So that kind of spaced learning, reinforcement of learning, making sure your learning is actually having an impact, which if you're in the learning business, you want to do that, because that's what's going to keep people coming back, is when you're able to do that. So, that's an interesting one. We've seen quite a bit happening with virtual conferences. My company, Tagoras, is behind our virtual conference. And we like to think we're doing some good things there in terms of providing community and treating learning not as a transaction and not as an event, but as a process and a relationship, and trying to actually shape what we're calling a conference into being something quite different from your traditional conference.
Excellent. I had microlearning on my list too, but you just covered what I would have said. I loved that you pointed out the fact that we can now access things. And I think that a lot of that's the technology, the microlearning piece of, we now have the search that I can get right to what I want and get just that, and do this in chunks and do it over time. Because like you said, otherwise, you go to college 4 years, but even in a 4-year degree, you can't just automatically pull up what you needed from your freshman year once you're in your sophomore, senior year. One thing has concerned me, and I'd really love your feedback, because you're one of the other people we've brought on who has a background in the more the traditional education also. And you pointed out that people are seeing the value of really giving the student what they need to learn so that they keep coming back. And one of the places I think that that's going to flesh out, I've been teaching this and preaching this for the last several years, but I'm seeing it with my customers now coming back to me and saying, you were right, is that we got into this phase of where you mentioned video learning.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with that is if all you give people is a video,
right,
you've given them a YouTube channel, not a true class that they can go back and they can reference, and they can do that quick reference we need on our steps without going back and forth in the video,
mm-hmm.
or like you would on a television channel. Now I'm starting to see people come back to me and go, yeah, I really probably do need to go put those written steps in because people are complaining about it.
Yeah.
From an ed perspective, I'd love to know your thoughts on those types of multiple touch points and how we evaluate that we really are getting to our learners what we need.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And I hesitate to even mention this. I certainly won't go too deep into it, but there's been a hot debate, kind of a, what do they call it, a tempest in a teacup among instructional learning types around learning styles and whether
Yes.
learning styles are really meaningful. And, and the conclusion is when it comes to sort of teaching and really leveraging learning styles in a meaningful way, the answer is kind of no. But we do know that using multimedia and giving people different ways to access content does result in better learning.
Right.
And so you can't rely just on video. You can't rely just on text. You can't rely just on audio. It's good to give people a mix. And I think particularly with video, you're spot on. This isn't even a formal learning example, but I do happen to use a WordPress plugin provider who does all of their support with brief videos. And it drives me nuts because I don't need to watch the 5-minute video. I just need to know that one thing, that if I were just looking at a sheet of paper, I'd be able to find it very easily. But, it's a headache to deal with what they're doing in terms of support. And support, of course, is a kind of informal learning opportunity as well. So they should be paying attention to learning principles. All of you, technology supporters out there, recognize you're teaching, really. You're supporting learning. So definitely, have the multiple modalities here, give it to people in a way that they're going to be able to access it in the way that they need it when they need it.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yes. I pretty much tell people almost everything like that is a teaching opportunity. Support is a teaching opportunity. Sales is a teaching opportunity.
Yep.
I know that there's a difference in, selling and actually teaching, but it's all about sharing a message and transforming that or transferring that to someone. Yep. Which is the basis of what teaching is.
Yeah, in either case, you're changing behavior. You're out to change behavior. And if you don't know the tools that are going to help make that happen, which are the tools of learning,
yes,
you're gonna strike out.
Absolutely. I need to hand it back to Jonathan because I know we're coming up on our break.
Yeah, we're going to have to go for our break. We've had a fascinating conversation with Jeff Cobb. And we'll be coming back in a few moments and we'll be discussing a lot of things. Back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We've had a great discussion already. I'm just going to throw in another question in, Jeff. Seth Golden, and when I read his book, The Dip, obviously I would imagine you're well aware of his book, The Dip, and the kind of process he says that all learners go through where they have a serrated period and then they have this dip. Do you agree with the fundamental synopsis in the book? And are there any things that can help when somebody goes into the dip area?
That's actually one of Seth's books that I have to say I've not actually read, though I'm familiar with his thinking around it. So I'm not going to say that I'm offering a deep analysis of what he does there. But it is true that generally speaking, any sort of meaningful learning that's going to last is going to require effort. There's just no way around it. Anything that requires effort, you're going to have those times where it's just not clicking, and you have to try to push through on it. So,
can I just interrupt slightly? I'm not to be rude. Have we got any idea of why things don't click?
Well, other than for fairly simple tasks, I can maybe learn to do something quickly on my computer and remember it, and it's not going to be a big deal. But for example, like if I'm trying to learn to play the guitar, which I've been doing my entire life, and I certainly have ups and downs when it comes to that. For learning to stick, you've got to basically weave the connections in your mind that are going to put it into long-term memory. And part of that process is repetition and practice over time, consolidation of what you're learning into memory. That practice routine, there's a process called effortful retrieval there. So, you really have to make yourself bring it back out and use it again. And if you're doing anything complex, that has nuances and subtleties to it, if I've got to not only master all the scales on the guitar, but then actually be able to translate them into meaningfully using them and creating a guitar solo of my own, I mean, that's a tremendous thing to accomplish. And it's just natural that you're going to practice up to a point, and you're likely going to hit a wall, and you need to walk away and let your brain do some of the work that's going to help those connections to form, come back again, and keep working at it. And this is one of the reasons why motivation is just so incredibly important, and I think it's overlooked in a lot of discussions around learning or in how people are approaching learning, because you've really got to help learners tap their motivation. I think that's one of the best things that a teacher can do, because if you can get the learner to tap their motivation, they're going to be willing to put in the effort and to push through when they hit that dip.
Oh, thanks for that, Jeff. Back to you, Kim.
I love that, the motivation being important. And keeping them motivated. I love to know if you have any ideas about, particularly now that we're going in with where we can work with people over the time, ideas for continuing motivation, or maybe being able to tap in as they start reaching those tough spots to give them that motivation to get them over the next hurdle. Any ideas of how to incorporate that into particularly our online programs?
Yes, I mean, I can speak about it broadly, and I have to say this is an area that I'm really intensely thinking about right now myself, because particularly if you're trying to get a community going, get people participating over time, you really have to figure out motivation. One of the main sources that I look to, or points of research and inspiration, is Edward Deci work, and I'm not sure if it's Deci or Dici. I've never known how to pronounce his name correctly, but it's he's done some of the pioneering work in motivation. He has a great book called Why We Do What We Do. It's very readable. He talks about motivation as being tied to really three concepts. One is autonomy. So just feeling like we have control, like we are autonomous individuals, and, that we're in a situation that we do have control over. Another is competency. So just feeling like we can do this, that, we are improving. And the third one is connectedness. So that we're connected to others. It's kind of the source of meaning in what we're doing. We're seeing that this has meaning, and that it works. And so I think when you're talking about designing and delivering learning experiences, to think about how you can support those three factors of motivation. How do you help people feel like they're in control? Like I referenced that support experience with the plugin provider. I don't feel in control there. It's actually demotivating to try to deal with support there because I can't get at what I want. So that's really important for motivation, to give people a feeling of competency. And this is, giving them some ways that they can show themselves that they are making progress, that they are getting it. And this goes back to your question, Jonathan, about the dip. If you can get those little signals that, yes, I have mastered a little bit here and I can keep going and master more, just that level of competency is incredibly important. And then finally, the connectedness and, being able to connect learners together, to share experiences, to hear what others are doing, to share what they're doing, to teach others, to learn from others. To the extent that you can engineer all of those things into the learning experiences you're providing, you're going to substantially support motivation and really get people, into what you're providing.
I think my own observation when it comes to online courses, and I love your input on this, and also Kim's, is that I think the two areas is repetition, but also mentorship. And if you can combine those into your course at different price points, have a starter course, but also having a really good description, a good outline on what precisely the course, who is the course aimed for,
Mm-hmm.
and then offers some upskill, a pathway, but also in the higher cost courses offer real mentorship, real group or individual mentorship sessions. What do you think about that, Jeff?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been focusing sort of more on the learning education side of the equation here, but my total focus is on being in the learning business, in the education business. So I really focus on the business side, quite a bit. How do you market effectively? How do you price effectively? How do you create, great products? And I always think it's important, and this is where business and learning really mesh quite well. And what you're saying, Jonathan, that you want to give people options. That's a great thing to do from a business standpoint, so that they can come in at a lower price point, and you can, eventually move them to a higher price point with higher value associated with it, something like a mentorship. That also aligns very well with learning, because their initial need, they're probably not going to be going as deep. They just need to get some familiarity, some initial competency. But then if they decide they want to move into a more expert type level, you're providing them the option to do that. You're providing that path for growth, which is a great thing to do for learning. So, yeah, I think anybody who's going to offer an online course of any type should look at it and say, okay, what could I offer that's one or two steps down from this? What can I offer that's one or two steps up from this? And have a minimum of 3 offerings whenever you put a product into the market, just based off of that core content.
What do you think, Kim?
Absolutely. And that's something I've been working with my clients and students for a while, is having those different offers, as well as what I'm seeing in the market now, because more and more courses are coming online. If you want to charge a premium, people are paying for access. Mm-hmm. So whether that is a high-end coaching program or mentorship program, whichever you want to call it, however you want to lay it out, or even if it's a regular class, but instead of being the $399 or $499 class, it's $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, because you have time for, I call it office hours with my students. I'm actually online there to help and support them X amount of time a week, or critique their work, et cetera, give them feedback. Because that's something that a lot of times in the online learning, people rushing to this concept of passive income, that it's lost. Okay, I went through your 4 lessons, but now what? How do I know if I did anything right?
Yeah.
Depending on what you're teaching, that may or may not be a case, but I definitely see it as something. And I think as we go forward, if you want to charge a premium price, you're going to have those premium programs more and more.
Yep, definitely.
Also, do you feel there are benefits to, on the higher level, that you actually have physical meetings? Do you think it is necessary at some stage? Why is, and if you do agree with that, why do you think it helps in the learning process, having the option of periodically having a conference or weekend meeting with students, with the course creator or mentors?
It's an interesting area. I would say that I don't think it's absolutely necessary. If you're using the tools properly, you can achieve very high levels of learning purely online. And there's a good, the whole body of research around really the medium not mattering so much as the methods, and being able to employ the right methods in whatever medium you're using. Now, that said, from both a business and a learning standpoint, I'm still very much a fan of face-to-face. I think things happen in face-to-face that, you just can't count on happening in an online environment. Knowledge gets shared, behaviors get modified in ways that just aren't going to happen in an online environment. And then I think from a business standpoint, if you're able to build that face-to-face relationship with your customers, when you're back online with those people, that connection is just going to be that much deeper. We talked about connection earlier around motivation. You start to have a highly motivated group when you're meeting with those. It may just be your core followers, the 10 or the 20 or the 50, but that group of people gets really motivated. They get really, almost evangelistic. And if they're in your online community, for example, they're probably going to be the ones who are, really driving that community for you. So I think there's a lot of value still in face-to-face. And you see it a lot with the online providers almost inevitably start moving towards also having, a major annual event or something like that where they're pulling people together.
Got a final question, Kim, and then we'll wrap up the podcast part of the show.
I had one. I loved your idea of talking about even an online community, building it to a point where people could teach and learn from others. Really powerful stuff, because, one of the best ways to learn is to teach.
Right.
I have to learn it well enough to explain it to somebody else. Have you done that online? So in my classes, a lot of times I have forums where people are sharing, but I've done it in offline classes, but never in an online class. Have you ever done anything where you actually formally set up to where students would take a small chunk and teach it to the other part of the group? And if so, what was the response to that?
We have. In fact, it's a central part of our events, both online and face-to-face. We've done this. We do what we call content pods, which are short 15 to 20 minute talks. And we've even done 10-minute talks, which we call 10-minute talks at one of our events. And for those in particular, we go specifically to people who attend our events, people who are typically the learners, and recruit them to deliver some of those short segments on something they're passionate about. And in this current online conference, we actually went total practitioner, basically. So we presented some of the content, but we also went to some of our usual students and said, we'd like you to do a full-blown workshop on this, an hour-and-a-half long online workshop. And so most of we've had a total of 8 workshop sessions. We only delivered one of them, and we've had practitioners deliver the other 7. And we always hear back from those people that it's a fantastic experience because, they know this stuff, but as you were saying, Kim, to really kind of master it, you have to teach it. You have to go through that process of how am I going to explain this to somebody else? And we've just had some incredibly valuable sessions as a result of that.
Thank you.
That's great. We're going to wrap up the pod part of the show, folks. But if you want to see more of our discussion, you'll be able to go to the WP-Tonic website. And we're going to continue the discussion with Jeff. I'm going to ask Jeff some questions, probably about Malcolm Gladwell's couple of his books, and see what Jeff's been really great with my questions. So Jeff, how can people contact you and learn more about what you and your company's doing?
Sure. I'm in a number of different places. Probably most likely for the WP-Tonic audience, I would say check out my Learning Revolution site, which is at learningrevolution.net. And the great thing is if you go there, I've got my Learning Revolutionaries toolbox, which I've just recently put out a completely revised and new edition of that, completely free. You don't even have to give me your email address. I just want people to get it. And it goes through like all of the different tools that you would use to create and deliver online courses. It's about 33 pages long. So really, really chock full of good information. So go to learningrevolution.net, download the toolbox, and of course there's a contact form there, which you'll be able to get straight to me from that.
We'll make sure that's in the show notes. Kim, how can people contact you and find out what you're up to?
I think the easiest way is to check out all my different platforms at kimshivler.com. So whether you're looking for the WordPress online course piece or just my instructional design and strategies, that's where you can find them.
And if you want to find about WP-Tonic, there's 2 great places. Go to the website. There's a load of information on that website. If you're into learning management systems or membership sites, or go to the Facebook page. All the latest interviews are on there, and I'm going to do a bit more activity on there myself. If you want to really support the show, give us a review on iTunes. It really does help the show, and I do periodically have a musing on the new ones, and I read them out on the show, so that could be amusing. So we're going to wrap up this part of the show, but like I say, if you want to see more of our interview, go to the WP-Tonic website or our YouTube channel, and we'll be back next week with somebody doing something either in WordPress or learning management systems, but they're doing something of real interest. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye. So back to the interview. Like I say, Another author that's really influenced me around my view around education is Malcolm Gladwell and a couple of his books. The two areas which he seemed to cover is, intelligence and the linkage between genetics and intelligence, but then the outcomes that people think if they're really blessed with really high genetic intelligence doesn't mean that they're going to get the outcomes in life that they think they are. Also, and also society is kind of misleading itself. The second area that he talks about is class size, that actually a lot of people think a really small class size always means better actual outcomes. But where Malcolm says there's actually evidence that having the right mixture of students and the right size and having it too small can actually reduce the possibility of learning. What do you think of those ideas?
I'll start with the second one.
Only slightly small questions.
Yeah. And I'm not quite as up to speed on this. I did write a book a number of years ago called Shift Ed, which was about K through 12 education, and class size was something we looked at then, and I have not really kept up with it strongly since. But I do know that the research on it is pretty mixed in terms of what really is or is not effective in terms of class size. And smaller class sizes tend to apply best in, I guess, what I would describe as special situations where you have either really highly talented students who the extra attention is really good for, or students who need more remedial attention. But sort of in the middle, what Gladwell is saying about, it's more about the mix and how that classroom is managed, I think is probably true. Now, that said, I've got kids in elementary school right now, and just, based on what I see and hear day to day, their classes are not too bad. But I could see benefits of potentially having a smaller class size.
Oh, I'm not trying to say that a class of 40 is going to be beneficial for anybody. I think there's a sweet spot, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think they're pretty close to it at my kids' school. They're in the low 20s in their classes. So, but yeah, I think that's a lot better than getting up in the 40s. But I'll stop talking on that because I can probably just put my foot in my mouth because I don't really feel like I am a class size expert. The other question, though, about sort of native abilities versus, what Gladwell.
Well, it's linked to what we discussed around motivation, isn't it?
Yeah. Gladwell's famous. He's famous for a lot of things, but one of them is the 10,000 hours, which he sort of took from Anders Ericsson's work around deliberate practice. And I think there's an awful lot to that. It's true. We all know geniuses who don't seem to really be getting anywhere in life. And then we know people who seem completely average who are just knocking it out of the park because they put in the time and the effort. And, I'll reference music again, which I seem to continually do, but music, you're always sort of looking at your learning experience with music. And, and I know for a fact, the more time I put in and the more deliberate I am about it and focused in my practice around the guitar or the piano, I reap the rewards for it. Whether 10,000 hours is exactly the right number or not, probably nobody really knows. But clearly, the people who really do put in the time and the effort consistently over time are going to be the higher performers. You may still never become, Mozart if you're only of average native abilities, but you can become, a damn fine pianist or composer if you're willing to put in the time on it. So, and as you said, that does go back to motivation. I think it goes back to building relationships with your learners, really engaging people over time and helping them with that growth and with, accumulating those hours and really achieving that positive change. So I think Gladwell's work should be influencing the way that edupreneurs and other education providers think about how they interact with their customers, with their students.
Thanks, Jeff. Kim, got any more questions? I'm sure you do.
I always have questions. I have to throw my idea though on my issue with the learning size study, the class size studies, was there's definitely a sweet spot. We know that in 100 or 200 students, and 100 students in a high school lecture is probably not the best thing. But part of it is everything else we've been talking about, Jeff. Mm-hmm. It has to do with how are you implementing the learning? What's the instructor doing, et cetera?
Right.
It's not just about, is it 20 students or 10? What are you doing with those 20 students?
Yeah. No, I've
And
seen
how are you
brilliant learning experiences with, 100 or 1,000 people involved, if the people facilitating it knew what they were doing.
Right. I mean, and I think anybody who's, it's not my thing, but I think people who go to things like Tony Robbins events tell you that they come out changed, and that's a whole bunch of freaking people.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
He understands how learning works, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And motivation works. And so, I would not do that with just a group of students, elementary school students, I guess. I have no experience with elementary school though. But do you see anything? So like one of the things that excites me, I just touched on earlier about the microlearning, is the fact that our technology now allows us to quickly access what we need when we need it. Mm-hmm. Anything else you're seeing as you're working in this area of technology coming out, or ways to leverage technology that can give us that type of real leap on what traditional learning in a classroom couldn't?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest ones, and they're going to come much faster than I think anybody is realizing right now, or what's going on with both virtual reality and artificial intelligence. I think what virtual reality is going to provide in terms of allowing people practice experiences, because we know that practice and application are just so critical to learning, particularly any sophisticated type skills or behaviors. We'll reach a tipping point in that, I'm sure, within the next few years, where we're going to see it be very common for people to engage in virtual training experiences. So definitely watching that. And then just, artificial intelligence, I think one of the things that's so interesting there is that artificial intelligence is so quickly, it already is changing, and it's going to so quickly change, the nature of work, the nature of what human beings need to know, what it's useful for human beings to know, which is going to be different because, to the extent that a machine can learn it, businesses are going to have machines learn it, and they're going to use the machines for lots of obvious reasons. So, what do human beings need to know that's different in whatever field, assuming their field still exists after this, and how do they need to interact with machines? And that's a fascinating area. I mean, we already interact with machines continually throughout our days. We're doing it right now, basically, but that's just going to become, more and more sophisticated, and we're going to be using machines in, ways we haven't even thought of yet. So those are two areas that fascinate me, and I won't claim to be an expert in either of them, but I think they are going to transform how we think about learning. And then as providers, as people in the learning business, what we need to do to serve our students.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and maybe you've studied more of this or know where it's going. I agree with you. I think the virtual reality piece in particular is going to have to get to the point where it can be easier and more affordably done.
Yeah. Because
we're still at that point where, to create a true VR experience is not something us as entrepreneurs can do.
No, it's still, I mean, you still have to show up at a specialized training center at this point to do that. But even those training centers are going to become much more common, and there will be places that entrepreneurs can take advantage of going forward. So it might change the nature, for example, of your live event. That people aren't, flying into a hotel anymore. They're flying into a virtual training center or a hotel that's attached to a virtual training center, so that you're able to take advantage of that as part of the experience.
Oh, that's great. Are there any kind of your observation of the territory? Are there any areas where you think a lot of people, when they come into the online course business, and I mean people that, I don't want to be dismissive here, but that are serious about trying to achieve our objective, is there any things that you see them regularly not understanding when they come into the field, or mistakes or hurdles that they come to that you can see any pattern?
It depends where they're coming from. I'll say the first sort of overall observation or comment I would make is that, being successful in the online course business is no easier than being successful in any other business. And we know what the failure rates are for small businesses and for startups and that sort of thing. So, not to be pessimistic, but don't expect success, for the most part, unless you're really willing to work at it. And then in terms of where people are coming from, we mentioned the internet marketers earlier as sort of being potentially a fertile area to look at. A lot of the marketers come into it and they just have the marketing mindset, and it's just sell, sell, sell. And they're not thinking about actually achieving learning results, achieving impact, the type of things that are going to, create long-term relationships and get people coming back. They're just thinking this is a new way to make a buck. And they may make a buck in their initial launch, but then it starts to fade off pretty quickly. So that's coming from the marketing side. And then, coming from the educator side, you have a lot of subject matter experts, a lot of traditional educators, maybe coming from university, maybe coming from the corporate world or consulting or whatever it is. And they think, I've got this great expertise. The world is going to want it. I'm just going to put everything into a course, and boy, I'm going to sit back. And as you said earlier, Kim, get that passive income. Doesn't happen because they don't understand the marketing side of it. And the two really do have to meet, the education and the marketing. They're two sides of the same coin, really, if you're in this business, and you have to have a good understanding of both of them. And if you're an educator who's not good at marketing, you better get some marketing help. And if you're a marketer who's not good at education, you better get somebody who actually understands how to put together an effective learning experience.
Oh, I totally agree with you there. But on a slightly brighter note, but it's true, everything you said is totally true, is that I really see education and education courses being utilised as part of a product, online service, as a differential, as a method of making your product, service, whatever it is, better, different to the segment of the market that you're trying to achieve success. Would you agree with that, Jeff?
Yeah, it absolutely can be. And I think approaching it in that way is very smart. And then figuring out exactly how does it differentiate me? I mean, just having a course per se may be an initial differentiator, just depending on what market you're in. But I think we know that, the world is being flooded with online courses right now. So, what is that course going to do? It's really going to complement what you're doing otherwise in your business. It's really going to add some significant value. It's really going to build that, customer relationship over time. And if you think that through, I mean, that just comes down to being strategic, basically. And, anybody who's strategic and then is, willing to put in the work both on the education and the marketing side. I mean, obviously there's a huge opportunity right now. I mean, this is a booming area. So, as you said, I don't want to be a wet rag or cynical about this. There is tremendous business opportunity. It's just recognizing that it is a business, and you got to treat it like that.
You've been a really champ with the questions. I've given you some quite hard questions in a way, but I didn't want to repeat your previous interviews. I wanted to find some new territory, and thank you for being up for answering some of my broad questions. I'm going to send you another broad question, but education in Britain and also in America seems to be in a little bit of a crisis. Have you reflected on that, and you got any insights of what might be causing that crisis? Or would you agree with the word crisis?
I think if it's not a crisis, it's pretty close. I mean, I don't know Britain, but I do know the U.S. and certainly it just seems like, for the last decade, there's been a sense of turmoil. And I think always K through 12 education just always seems to be under fire. And I think that's just probably the nature of parents being parents and, that sort of thing. But, with all the shifts in technology, with the rise and the importance of college and university and getting kids into college and university, I think there's additional pressure on K through 12. And then, of course, higher education has come under a ton of fire just because it's so expensive in the U.S. I don't know exactly what it's like in Britain, but people are spending a lot of money. And then you have things like Deloitte coming out with studies that say the average shelf life of a degree is 5 years. And you just spent $200,000 or whatever, and 5 years later, that degree is not worth anywhere near $200,000. So, I think the better schools certainly are tuned into this and are making efforts to leverage everything we've been talking about, from new instructional strategies that reflect learning science to actually making good use of technology. We don't get too much into the academic market around continuing education and professional development, but we're starting to, because a lot of those university continuing education and professional development departments are getting much more entrepreneurial themselves. They're starting to see what's happening out there. And you've seen things like the big, massive open online course providers come along, the Course Eras and the edX's and those sorts of things. So, there's a lot going on out there. I think it's still up in the air right now how well it's going to sort itself out, and particularly for higher education, exactly how relevant its role is going to be, say, 10 years from now. I'm not going to predict that higher education is going away, but what we look at, what we serve in our business, is what we call the other 50 years. I mean, most of us graduate from higher education, if we're lucky enough to get it, and we still got another 50 years in front of us. And that's where this whole market that we've been talking about is so incredibly important, and why there's such a huge opportunity there. And I think we're going to see universities looking much more at that other 50 years. And, for example, how do they keep their alumni engaged and continue to serve them long after they've graduated? We're already seeing a lot more of that going on. So I really do think that the kind of this market we're talking about, the lifelong learning, continuing education, professional development market, is going to drive a lot of what happens in those other two sectors of education, because this really is a third sector of education that kind of hasn't gotten the attention that it should in the past. And now people are realizing how incredibly important it is, and the rest of it needs to serve, how well people are going to do once they get out into that other 50 years.
Oh, thank you so much for the answer. Just to quickly comment on it, I think there's kind of external forces which higher or lower education is exposed to, which they have very little control over, economic, social pressures. But then there's trends, attitudes inside the industry of learning, as I call it. I've observed that a lot of universities in America and to some degree in Britain want to become very large, and there's a economy of scale around that. But the problem is they become very impersonal institutions where a lot of the less able students just get lost and fall out. I think that's an ongoing trend, which obviously we're tribal creatures, and I think there's a lot of evidence that there's a kind of sweet size of institution where we really prosper, and when it gets too large it becomes depersonalized. I think there's those trends, and also I think there needs to be a high level of flexibility about when you can attend, when you don't have to attend, the length, blah, 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 that fits in more to the reality of a 20th century economy. That would be mine. Quickly, do you think there's any sense in what I've just said, or do you think I've just gone off the rails there, Jeff?
No, definitely. I mean, and again, I think the better colleges and universities are tuning into this to non-traditional student needs, and it's not just your 18 to 22-year-olds who are now coming to higher education. And I think too, I mean, what we're probably going to see, I suspect, is sort of a little bit of a hollowing out of the middle in higher education. You're going to have the bigger institutions that are going to be more sort of the factories, which is what you're kind of referring to, I think, Jonathan. Hopefully they're going to get better at really being able to operate at scale and still be effective. That's what we'll hope for. Then there's going to be a lot more of these kind of boutique, very focused type experiences that happen in universities. So you either got the niche boutique, in most cases probably higher end, more expensive, or the much larger. The middle is getting to be a much harder area to navigate, I think, for institutions. And I think similar things are true in the sort of other 50 years market. I think in particular, the market for sort of more boutique, very focused type offerings that serve, specific niches within specific industries. I think that's a very fertile area for growth right now. And on the other end, you have the Udemy's of the world who are going to, have the Amazon-like catalog of courses for people.
I think that's great. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Jeff. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. You've been up for it. I really appreciate it.
Been
You've
fun.
answered all my crazy questions. Kim's questions were much more focused than mine, but that's normally how these interviews go. But thank you so much, and you must come back to the show. Hopefully you will agree to do that at some stage, because I've really enjoyed the interview. And just quickly, how can people learn more about you, just if people watching this on the website or YouTube channel, how can they contact you and learn more about you, Jeff?
Sure. If they just want to come to learningrevolution.net, I blog there regularly. You can get information about my Leading the Learning Revolution book there. You can get the Learning Revolutionaries Toolbox for free. You can get my online platform selection guide there for free. And you can contact me through the site, learningrevolution.net.
Oh, thank you. And Kim, quickly, how can people learn more about you, Kim?
Again, just check me out at kimshivler.com.
Oh, that's great. And folks, thanks for listening and watching. And we'll have another great guest next week. And thank you for being part of the experience. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye.